Okay, so these are just some problems that we're going to go through and kind of look at and just talk about these. It says, Jack says that if you take a number and multiply it by a fraction, the product will always be smaller than what you start with. Is he correct? Okay, so I'm going to take a number, and it says why or why not. Okay, I'm going to take a number, and I'm just going to pick the number 5. And I'm going to multiply 5 by a half. Okay. And what I'm going to do, and sorry guys, I need to get a new pencil because that lead is almost gone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and multiply this. And remember, I just multiply straight across. Whole numbers have that invisible 1, okay? So I've got 5 halves, because 5 times 1 is 5, and then 1 times 2 is 2. And when I convert this, because that's an improper fraction, 5 divided by 2, 2 goes into 5, 2 times minus 4, I get 1/2, okay? So this equals 2.5. So far I've taken a whole number, I've multiplied it by a fraction, my number's getting smaller. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try 10 and let's multiply it by a third. Okay, so remember invisible 1, 10 times 1 is 10 thirds. So let's come over here, 10 divided by 3, 3 goes into 10 3 times because I can get 9 and I get 1/3. So both of these, I start with a whole number. So I've started with 5 and I end with a smaller number of 2.5. I start with 10 and I end with a smaller number of 3.5. And it says why or why not. So the reason why you can start with a whole number, and when you multiply it by a fraction, your number is always going to be smaller, is because you're splitting, you're dividing that number. Because guys, remember, whenever, even though you're multiplying by a fraction, you're like, well, I'm multiplying it. So multiplying, you will have more. But not necessarily, because you're not multiplying it by a whole number. I'm only multiplying it by a half. So I'm taking 5 and I'm multiplying it just by a half of a number. Okay, and so when I have 5 halves, I only get 2.5. Same thing with 10. If I'm going to multiply it by just a third, remember, I'm multiplying it. So here's that one whole. I'm only multiplying it by that one little section. So anytime that you multiply a number by a fraction, it's always going to be smaller. Okay? There is an infinite number of ways to represent 1 on a number line. And it says in the space below, write at least 4 expressions multiplying by 1 and represent 1 differently in each expression. So on this one, what I want you guys to do is I want you guys to go ahead and try this. It says there's an infinite number of ways to represent 1 on a number line. In the space below, write at least 4 expressions multiplying by 1, but represent 1 differently in each expression. Okay? So when I represent 1, remember 1 can also be 4 over 4. Okay? 1 can also be 5 over 5. 1 can also be 10 over 10. It can also be 20 over 20. It can also be 100 over 100. So when I'm doing this, guys, this goes back. I'm just going to turn the paper over. This goes back to here. Because technically, guys, you multiplied this by 1 because 3 divided by 3 is 1. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So when you are doing this one, you can infinitely write a number of ways to represent the number 1. Okay? So it says to write 4 expressions multiplying by 1. I'm not going to go ahead and do that because we have done something on the other side. But just know that anytime you are multiplying anything like this, you're multiplying it basically by 1 because that's 100 divided by 100 is 1. Okay? Same thing with everything that you guys did on this side. When you multiplied it by 25 25ths, you multiplied it by 1. When you multiplied it by 2 halves, you multiplied it by 1. Because remember, all of these equal 1. Okay? Moving on to number 5. It says, Maria multiplied 1 to rename 1/4 as 100. She made factor pairs equal to 10. She used her method to change 1/8 to an equivalent decimal. Okay, so here's the way that she did it. She took 1/4. She said that's equal to 1 over 2 times 2. She did 5 times 5 over 5 times 5, which is going to give you 25. So you've got 25, and then it was 2 times 5 and 2 times 5, which this is going to be 10 and 10 which equals 100. So basically what she did was she just paired that one up and that one up, okay? And it says Paulo renamed 1/8 as a decimal too. So he named it as 1/8, okay? And he knows that the decimal equal to 1/4. And he knows that 1/8 is half as much as 1/4. Can you use his ideas to show another way to find the decimal equal to 1/8? Okay, so on this one, he knows that 1/8 is going to be half as much as this. Okay, and so what we need to do is we need to be able to turn it into that decimal, because that's just kind of a really hard way. And so if we follow the way that Maria did this, what we're going to do is we're going to take 1/8, okay, and we know that it is going to be 4 times 2, because I know that equals 4 times 2. Okay, and so now what we have to think about is that we need to turn this either into a tenth, a hundredth, or a thousandth. And when I think about this one I'm going to actually multiply to be able to get that base 10. This one I would have to multiply by 25, okay? This one I could just multiply it by 5, okay? So when I do this, I'm actually going to do 25 times 5. Alrighty, so then when I do this, I have to do 4 times 25, and then I have to multiply that all by 2 times 5, okay? All I did was just basically kind of separate all of that out, okay? And I made this, here's that 4 times 25, the 2 times 25, okay? So 25 times 25 is actually going to give me 125. Okay, because I know that 25 times 4 is 100, and then I add 25 to it, and it's 125, okay? And then over here, I know that I've got 4 times 25 is 100, and I'm going to multiply it by 2 times 5, which is 10. And when I do this, I get 125 thousandths. And to write that in decimal form, it's going to be 125 thousandths. So that's what's going to be equivalent to how to write his 1/8 as a decimal. Now, if you guys were thinking about what we did on the front side, where couldn't I figure out, well, I can't make a 10, I couldn't make 100, but I was able to make 1,000. Because if I look here, so here's 100 divided by 8, okay, doesn't go in evenly. But if I have 8, and I want to make it into 1,000, let's see here, 1, I'm going to get 20, 2 minus 16, I get 40, it's 125. So basically I multiplied both of these by 125, and I even multiplied 8 times 125. This, I just split it out, and I made 8 is 4 times 2, and figured out how I could make that either 10, 100, wasn't going to make 1,000, 10 and 100, to be able to solve it.